Right, so this is a tutorial on how to add the bullet 2D weapon and bullet system to your project. So start off with a 2D project. I'm just going to create a brand new one. You can also integrate it into an existing project. Just be aware that the asset does overwrite project settings, so be careful if you do that. Just make sure you back up your project settings before doing it, or you can import it into a dummy temporary project and then copy the asset over into your existing project if you don't want the project settings to be overwritten. So let's start off, create a new project. Right, so the first thing you want to do is of course to import the asset. So go to your package manager, switch over to your own assets that you've purchased, locate 2D shooter bullet and weapon system, and then click import, and just choose import and install or upgrade if it asks. Alright, so we get to this import Unity package window. Just make sure everything is selected and click import once again. Okay, now the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure your universal render pipeline and one other package is up to date. You can see I've got some errors here because I'm using a version that's got an older render pipeline, universal render pipeline installed. So I'm going to switch over to the Unity registry and I'm going to look for, where is it? Universal RP, render pipeline. And you can see that there's an update available for me. So I'm going to click update to 10.5.1 or whatever the latest version is for you. Okay. There's also post-processing. I'm just going to update this at the same time. Right, now if you've imported the asset into an existing project, it's going to overwrite your project settings and set up all the required settings for the assets demo scenes to work. So to verify that, just go edit project settings to open up this project settings window. Take a look at your physics 2D settings and just verify that the layer collision matrix, so this area here, looks like this. So you should see things like turret weapon system bullets. We've got weapon system bullets, so these layers need to be configured as is here. If you're copying the assets into an existing project and not overriding project settings, make sure that you've got the predefined layers set up as per this matrix. There's also a link in the README document of the asset that points to a screenshot that shows what it should look like. So with that done, you can load up the demo scenes. I'm just going to open up this demo scene, weapon configuration and inventory demo scene, and I'm just going to make sure that it runs. You can just check these boxes here to get some of the UI off. If you scroll your mouse and left click, you should see all the bullets shooting, and you can scroll your mouse wheel to change weapons. WASD keys move the character around. There's lots of more settings you can play around with here, but this is just a quick test to verify that the system works with the project settings you've selected. Okay, so with that done, let's go to a brand new scene and configure something from scratch. So I'm going to go new scene. I'm going to choose a 2D scene. I'm going to say create. Okay, now we've got a blank scene. So what I'll start out doing is I'm going to add a sprite. So right click the scene hierarchy, a new 2D object, sprite. I'm just going to put in a square. Let's just rename that to something like player. I'm going to change this material for the sprites to sprites default. Okay, and then I'm going to choose an actual sprite, just use the pre-bundled hero sprite that comes with the asset. I'm going to choose hero idle 01. Okay, so there we have our hero sprite. I'm going to just zoom the camera out by changing the orthographic projection to a higher value. Something like 8 should do. And I'm just going to change the background of the camera to something dark. Okay, next thing, on your player game object, we're going to add a component. We're going to add the player movement. This is just to get some basic movement so you can move the character around. I'm going to leave the default settings on that component. Next thing we want to add is a new game object in the scene hierarchy for a bullet pool. So I'm going to call this bullet pool. Now there's one included in the asset. You can also create your own if you like, but for this example purposes I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to add the object pool manager script, and to start things off it's got a whole lot of predefined prefab fields that you can populate, and depending on what you configure your weapon configurations with in terms of which bullets to use, you need to make sure you've set up appropriate bullet prefabs in this object pool manager script. All the prefabs are already included with the demo assets, so for this I'm just going to use this first one, the standard horizontal bullet prefab. So to find that, we go to prefabs, and I'm just going to drag and drop this first prefab into that slot over there. And while I'm at it, I'm going to take the spark particle effect and I'm going to put it in here. And maybe I might also add one of these beam prefabs. Let's put it into there. Okay, so I'm going to tell it how many bullets to spawn at the start of the game scene. So this just pre-allocates a whole lot of game objects into the pool, sets them to disabled so that they can easily be created without incurring too much of a performance penalty. So basically it allows you to shoot lots of bullets. So I'm going to spawn 200 of those, and let's say we've also got a beam 1 prefab, so I'm going to say 200 of those. Okay, so with that done, let's go back to the player game object, and we now need to add a weapon system. So this is the main script for the asset. Now what this does is it gives you this editor that allows you to create bullets configurations and patterns, and it uses an array of weapon configurations. You can see it down here. So at the moment it's empty, it's of 0 size. That's because we haven't created any weapon configurations and added them yet. First off, let's set some basics up. So for this game I'm going to say that I want bullets to come out of a specific point on the sprite. So instead of coming out of the center of the player, I want them to come out somewhere near his arm. So I'm going to create something called a gun point. So I'm going to right click the player game object. I'm going to say create empty, and I'm going to call this gun point. Now all this needs to be is just an empty game object with a simple transform. I'm going to switch back to the player. I'm going to drag and drop that gun point onto the gun point transform field, and I'm going to say that the weapon is relative to the gun point. Depending on what sort of aiming behavior, you can switch this between one of those two options. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to the gun point, and I'm going to move it to this position over here on the player. So that's where the bullets should come out from. So switching back to the player game object, we've got the weapon system here. I'm going to configure the first gun. So let's just give it a name. You can call it anything you like. First weapon. You don't have to select a weapon icon. This is more for the demo scene GUI, and if you want to integrate it into your own sort of UI system. You can configure ammo settings if you want it to have limited ammo. In this case, I'm not going to select any of those. I'm just going to leave it unlimited ammo. Now this is where you actually configure your bullet pattern. So I'm going to select bullet count of 1. I want 1 bullet to come out at a time. I'm also going to set a fire rate quite low, so these bullets will fire fairly quickly with minimal delay between each shot. Bullet speed, we definitely want some bullet speed because we want our bullets to move, so I'm going to select 20. Bullet randomness, this affects how the bullets come out in terms of small amounts of offset in their position when they come out. So I'm going to give it a little bit of bullet randomness. Now there's lots of other settings here that you can play around with and just test yourself, but for now I'm going to keep this fairly basic for the demo. I'm going to say maybe enable ricochet effects, ricochet bullets, and I'm going to give it a small chance to ricochet. So if there's a collider that the bullets hit, there's a 8% chance of them ricocheting off of that. We've got a hit effect, so that's to do with those spark prefabs that we added to the bullet pool. So it'll just spawn a spark when it hits something. And then obviously we've got shot fired, so just select one of the included sound effects. Then what we need to do is I'm going to select free aim for the shooter type, and bullet type tracer horizontal, because that's the bullet prefab type that we selected. Right, now the last thing to do is just say add weapon configuration to inventory. So now that adds our first weapon. So if you expand that out, if you ever need to make changes to this first weapon configuration again in the future, you can't make them up here anymore. You need to actually go down, expand out this item in the array, and make your tweaks to all the configuration options here. Alternatively, you can remove it from the array here. That'll delete the configuration and just reconfigure it up here, and then click add again. So with that done, let's save our scene and switch to game view and then click play. Right, so now we can move around and we can shoot with the left click. There's a really fast fire rate on this, so the sound effects sort of overlap quite a lot. You can see that the bullets are coming out relative to the gun weapon selected. There's no rotation or anything configured on the player sprites. This is just a basic example to show you the demo scenes do all of the rotation and everything else a lot better. Right, so that's a basic bullet. Let's go back to player, and I'm going to change the movement type to free aim. That'll give him a bit of a better movement. So if we use WASD again now, right, so going back to the player, let's add one more weapon type. So I'm going to call this beam weapon. I'm going to say that this has got limited ammo, starting ammo 300. Okay, and let's give it a little bit of bullet spread. We're going to give it 3 bullets. Little bit of spacing, a little bit slower bullet speed, a little bit slower fire rate, and let us see what else we can do here. Let's change the sound effect. Okay, you can add magazines as well if you like. By default you can press R to reload. I'm just going to leave that off for now. And if I say beam 1, because I know that we configure beam 1 prefabs in the bullets pool, then I'm going to say add weapon. So now you can see we've got 2 weapons. We've got our first weapon and our beam weapon. And by default the weapon script is configured to use the mouse scroll wheel on desktop machines, desktop builds, to cycle through the weapons. So you'll cycle from the first beam to the beam weapon and back again. So let's try that. So we got our first weapon. If I scroll mouse wheel, it's going to change to the beam weapon. Scroll wheel again, that, scroll wheel there. Now there's a trick. If you want to see instantly how your bullets look like when you are reconfiguring them, you can actually use this editor. It won't save the changes, but you can get a feel for how settings will change. So for example, I'm going to increase spread, and you can see the spread is a lot higher. Or I might say, let's have unlimited ammo now, and let's put auto fire on. Now it's going to fire without me actually needing to click on anything. Now you can start sort of tweaking settings and changing things just to see how they change on the fly. Bullet spacing, change things like the X offset, Y offset, actually that needs to be weapon relative to the object. So now you can change the offset. Maybe you want to add some randomness. Slow down the speed, increase the speed. Change the fire rate down. Increase the fire rate. Decrease the spread. Increase the number of bullets. Increase the spread. So you get the idea. And that's the demo and how to get set up and get going.